want to thank, I introduced the folks from Blackstone here a second ago, but I want to thank all the economic development folks that are here. Steve Holland is a great asset to the state of Montana, and I know there are many, many other folks out there, whether you're the SBA or whether you're with many of the communities that are vendors here today, or many of the university systems that we have in this state. And I'll touch on this a little bit in my closing comments, but the fact is that one of the reasons this state is set up so well for manufacturing is we have an incredible university system. And those folks do a great job, whether it's training folks in the trades or with four-year degrees or advanced degrees. They do an incredibly good job. So with that, I want to once again welcome you to the keynote address. Our final speaker today is a gentleman by the name of Tab Wilkins. Tab is the Pacific Northwest Regional Manager of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership with the United States Department of Commerce. I want to thank Tab for coming in today. I know he's very busy. I know there's probably 1,000 other things he could be doing than being in Helena, Montana today. But we thank you very much and appreciate you joining us to share your expertise on manufacturing. Tab Wilkins.
Well, thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure actually to come to Montana. As Steve knows, who I work with, my mom and dad met in Montana, and my mom grew up in Billings. And in terms of manufacturing, my grandfather was the superintendent or plant manager of the Great Western Sugar Beet manufacturing facility down in Billings. So Montana actually has a big place in our family, and I'm going to call my mom as soon as I get done today to tell her I was in Montana again, and she will be jealous again. As the Senator said, I'm with the NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership. NIST itself is the federal agency that has all the weights and measures and time for the U.S. We don't actually weigh the U.S., we just have the calibration weights. And it was originally created because a pound in New York was different than a pound in Pennsylvania, and they said we need a federal agency that ensures that a pound from one state to the other is exactly the same. So we do that today with volume measures, mass measures, and things like that. But in today's world, we also deal with a lot of other kinds of things. So for instance, we work with industry, cell phone industry, to make sure that your Nokia cell phone works with your Apple iPhone. Now, we don't mandate anything. We're not a regulatory agency, but we bring industry together to ensure that they have standards they work under. Another one that's a little less technical is we actually worked with industry to establish a standard for when you ship a box of goods. So if you ship a box and you say I have 99 units and it weighs 10 pounds, there's actually a NIST standard for whether you ship 98 and that's in conformance, or if it weighs 9.8 pounds, is that in conformance. And there's actually state regulators that work with those standards. So we do a lot of work with industry. The part of NIST that I'm with deals with serving small and mid-sized manufacturers across the United States. You heard Todd talk a little bit about what MMEC does here, but we cover every state of the union, plus Puerto Rico. My particular work is with Hawaii, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, and Wyoming. And my funny story about that region, if you will, is we were meeting with Steve one day with the folks from Wyoming, and Steve very rightfully and proudly said, we're a rural state. And we looked at the guy from Wyoming and we said, well, what does that make you? And he goes, we're sub-rural. Like, I don't know what that is. One of the really neat things is that Steve and his team with the governor's office and the EDA just completed a study about Montana manufacturing in the last year. And what you see here is a map that has all the locations of manufacturers in Montana. And so you can see there's really a broad geographic distribution of manufacturing across the state. There's clearly more of a concentration in certain areas, but the point is there's a lot of manufacturing here. $13 billion a year in annual production occurs out of Montana, and $1.5 billion of that is exported overseas. There's over 3,100 companies in Montana that manufacture, and that includes very small companies. 55% of the manufacturers in Montana are 20 employees or less, and about half of them don't even have an employee. They're just sole proprietorship. So it's a relatively small-sized industry base. But there's over 21,000 employees that work in manufacturing in Montana. And that actually represents 20% of the labor income in Montana. So 20% of your income comes through manufacturing. And one of the big keys we like to talk about, and I think Tom touched on it a little bit, is when the money comes into Montana for selling goods out of the state, that job person then takes that money and they buy at the restaurant, they go to the movies, they build a house. So for every manufacturing job that you create in Montana, you support 2.16 other jobs, or 2.6 other jobs in Montana. So it's not just that you have a manufacturing job, but it's a job that increases the employment base as a whole for the state. How many of you currently manufacture and sell? Put up your hand. How many of you want to become a manufacturer? Okay, smaller numbers. So this is a little bit aimed at probably the folks that are thinking about going into manufacturing. This is from the study that MMEC did, and you can see that people are getting a little bit more positive about manufacturing in the last couple of years. The study that Steve did and his team sent a survey out to 1,000 Montana manufacturers, and then they held 6 focus groups across the state to find out what are some of the key things going on in manufacturing. So some of it is that people are thinking manufacturing's in a better position. And I think there's a copy of the study over here if you want to go look at that. And I can tell you from looking at other indicators, things like the Federal Reserve Bank in Minnesota that does a survey of Montana manufacturers every year. The Texas Reserve Bank does a survey of manufacturers monthly. There's a very positive sort of thought process about sales growth, about profitability in manufacturing. So if you're thinking about going into it, now's probably a good time to think about it. And just to give you a sense of who these manufacturers are, you can see they come in different places in Montana. You can see that they're in different industries. There's plastics, there's food processing. The grain that's manufactured here uses the wheat that's grown here. There's high industry, there's electronics. Brian Woods here from the Power Grip company here. So there's really a variety of industries in Montana. It's not just one particular sector. And I think the photonics industry in Bozeman just set up an industry association. So there's more and more momentum being built in terms of Montana and manufacturing. So now what I want to pose to you are some questions around manufacturing, what you're thinking about. Some of these happen to be things that, from the work I do on a regional and national level, seem to be really important opportunities. Many of these, as I was listening to the presenters today, are things that some of you are already doing, so that'll validate that. But for those of you that aren't, it'll hopefully spur some thoughts in terms of these kinds of things. So the first thing is exporting. Exporting, it's really interesting. So 2/3 of the manufacturers that export are under 20 employees, 2/3. If you look at Europe, Japan, and Australia, they have twice the population of the United States, and they have twice the number of businesses, and they have as much discretionary income as we do. So you have twice as much opportunity just in those countries alone. If you think about Latin America, India, China, Asia, yes, their incomes aren't as strong as ours yet, but they are starting to build a middle class. They are starting to build international industry. So as you think about those as opportunities, they expand even more the kind of markets that you might be able to reach and industrial relations you might be able to build. We have a program in MEP that we call Export Tech. And essentially in Export Tech, we work with a small number of companies to actually develop and execute on a plan to reach new markets. And when we do this in concert with the district export councils, the state trade offices, the U.S. Commercial Service, the Export-Import Bank, Gold Key, and SBA. I mean, it's literally, we bring everybody together in the companies in a room, and each of those groups talk about how they can help you deliver. Carrie mentioned all the services that they provide, and this kind of forum helps set you up for that. And when I looked at it, 3 of the companies that spoke this morning spoke about their export work overseas. All right, so it's really an opportunity. And we did one of these in Wyoming, just to give you some other case examples. There's a gentleman named Tom Balding of Tom Balding Bits and Spurs. All right, so he makes bits and spurs for horses. He went through that program about 6 months ago, and he's now selling in Australia, Europe, and Japan. Another woman named Peggy Drury, who owns Crazy Woman's Water out of Buffalo, Wyoming. She now sells into Canada. Doesn't sound like a big jump, but for her it was a really big deal to take that quote-unquote overseas. So you don't have to be big. You don't have to be sophisticated. You just have to think about it. And there's a lot of programs and support, and some of the things that Carrie talked about really minimize the financial risk for going into that market. So you should think about that. We see a lot of companies, a lot of manufacturers that are able to expand their opportunities because of exporting. Another thing we see happening today is what I'll call innovation or new product development. And what you see up here are 3 different examples of structured programs in which companies take a look at what kind of ideas do they want to create, how do those ideas meet a need in the marketplace that's meaningfully unique. I think Todd talked about that a little bit. And they help you figure out whether that idea has merit before you invest all the money in creating a prototype or a product. Now, why is this important? Well, obviously, if you're thinking about manufacturing, you want to really take a hard look at what you're going to make, what value it has, because when you go to ask people for money, they're going to ask you that question. How big is it? How much is it going to be worth? Another key, however, is these kinds of systems allow you to build within your company a structured culture of innovation so you never run out of ideas. You've always got a process for creating the next idea. One of the things I heard from Tom, one of the things I heard from Bill, was that they keep on creating a new idea that helps them expand. And in fact, when we've talked with companies that have what I'll call an innovation strategy, their profitability is twice as high as a company that's just competing on cost. Twice as high. The workers in those jobs that work in those companies make on average $10,000 more per year working in an innovating company. And there's a federal tax credit for R&D. Now you might say, well, that sounds good, that's probably for companies like, I don't know, Monsanto or Boeing that, do high-end research. No, it's not. It's for companies that change the way they're doing business, that change the way they're trying to do R&D. And if you talk to your tax and attorney, your CPA accountant and attorney, they should be able to give you good advice on how to take advantage of those tax credits. All right, so there's actually, if you will, a write-down of your financial risk to go into R&D. Now the way these work is they'll typically have you create a bunch of ideas. So they're really encouraging not just you, but your leadership team, or your investors, or your potential customers to come up with ideas that you could make for them. And then in each case, they have you talk about, okay, why is this important to me as a customer? Not just why it's neat from your perspective, but why is it important to me from a customer and I want to buy it. So meaningfully unique is a term that we use. The top one you see here is called Design Thinking out of Stanford University, right? And they, in their little octagon, whatever the correct term is for those circles, almost circles, you know, they've kind of looked at what's the empathy with the customer, what are they looking at, how do you create a product. The next one down is called StageGate. It's been around for a while. It's extremely formalized and structured. And then in the final one on the bottom right, Innovation engineering is one that we at NIST use a lot. We started to modify how we use it. But the point is, it creates a structure for you within your company to really take a look at an idea. It helps you come up with sort of a quick look at prototypes, and how do you go talk to potential customers so you can vet the market before you get into the point of actually making the product. So we're seeing more and more companies using these structured approaches to do the ideation and, if you will, the initial thinking about their products. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into this new product idea, and I think Rhonda kind of touched on this. I was laughing. I just chatted with her a second. I said, you touched on one of the things I was going to talk about, and that's when you do your manufacturing prototype. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you get that done. As you think about your product, a lot of times you'll iterate. I created this good. Now I'm going to stick something else on it. Now I'm going to stick something else on it. Now I'm going to add an electronic component. And pretty soon you got this prototype that works. And so you just kind of go, well, I made it that way to work the first time. I think I'll just keep making it that way. Well, there's various types of techniques called design for manufacturability, where you take a look at how you originally made that product, and you start to analyze it to look at, well, you know, there's 3 different pieces that I put together. What if I created them as one piece? So I reduce the number of parts I have to make, which improves my quality, reliability. It reduces the number of times you have to touch the assembly, because I'm just going to stick 1 part instead of 3. Okay? You start to look at different ways in which you can make that manufacturing product. And what you see on this chart is that by the time you get done with your prototype, when you first do it, if you don't change anything, you've locked in 85% of your manufacturing costs. All right? So you want to think about, if I step back for a second and take another look at how I put this together, could I reduce some more costs? And when you reduce costs, you have the chance to increase your profitability. You have a chance to reduce quality issues. It just makes everything better. So I would encourage you that as you think about new ideas and innovation, what we're seeing with a lot of folks is, okay, now I've come up with the idea, let's make sure that we've got our design for manufacturability done well. And it pertains to quality issues and certifications and all other types of stuff too. So a couple of ways to do the prototyping. You heard from one of them, which was Bill. Additive manufacturing is really a very big thing right now, and it sort of was, you know, in the research environment at one time, stereolithography, I think Bill mentioned, but we're seeing it used more and more today. And the difference here is, for a lot of prototyping, sometimes you have to go and have somebody make a tool. You know, like a big decision at one point, if you're in the plastics parts, is you have to make a mold. All right, it's $40,000 to make a mold, and I can't make a prototype unless I make a mold, or I got to go to a specialty shop and they've got to, you know, put me in line with everybody else to cut a plastic part. But with additive manufacturing, you can build it from the bottom up. If you don't like it, you just made one part, you can try it a different way. So the cost of doing your prototyping goes down substantially. And so this is one of the ways that when you start thinking about design for manufacturability, you can maybe begin to affect your cost of product. The other thing that we're starting to see more companies do, the awesome label that you see up there is out of Ohio and the Ohio State University Supercomputing Center. And it's in modeling and simulation. So a lot of large companies, when they go to make a part or to make a product, they'll do modeling and simulation not only about the product, but the manufacturing about that product, the setup for the process. And yes, those software packages cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. You had to have somebody on staff who was a specialist in running that software. But Ohio and we're seeing more and more of this, has created a user interface where for a few $100s, you, not a computer expert, but you can go in and do modeling and simulation of different elements of your manufacturing. Now, they're developing this, but the first stage of that right now is joining technology. So they're working with the Edison Welding Institute, and you can go in and you can try out and model and simulate different joining techniques to see if those work better than what you might try in the shop floor before you get to the shop floor, because maybe instead of trying 10 different welds, you try 2 different welds. Another thing that they've got in there is plastics molding and how you do a lot of your flow in terms of the injection molding. So again, you can go in there and for a few $100s, you can see how that might work. For those of you that do injection molding, you can appreciate, you know, the density and the temperature and all that kind of stuff. So we're starting to see more and more a price point for some of these modeling and simulation techniques that can come into a point where small companies can start to take advantage of these techniques before you get into the manufacturing stage. So I just wanted to make sure that as you think about new ideas in a structured fashion, you come up with a prototype, you think about design for manufacturability. As you think about that, you can employ a couple of new techniques that can help you lower your costs before you go to market. So a final thing, a couple final things. One is manufacturing strategies. A lot of people sort of feel like they have to manufacture everything from soup to nuts. I was literally in Alaska the day before yesterday working with a company up there, and the guy 4 years ago said, I'm going to make everything that goes into my product. And he makes a product that is like a vehicle. I said, well, how many parts is that? He goes, 1,600. I said, you're going to make everything in Alaska? And he goes, yeah. So that's the top line. You're going to make everything. You take on all the risk when you make everything. You got to figure out how to make every part. You got to figure out how to set up a manufacturing system. You got to invest all the capital costs for the equipment to run that operation, plus sales and distribution. Most companies do the second row here, where you have somebody else make certain parts, you have those come into your shop, you make certain parts, and then you assemble those. So if your expertise is metalworking and making a unit, you can subcontract your electronics, or you can subcontract a wheel assembly or something like that and have those brought in. So a lot of people do that. The third one down is really where you outsource all your manufacturing. And we actually have a company in Montana that does this. The gentleman does R&D. He creates new products. And then he finds a company that makes some of the parts, and they ship it to another company that does the assembly and makes some more parts, and they ship it to another company that does more assembly, and then that company ships it to the customer. So the guy actually never touches the product. It doesn't even show up in his town. But he runs a company, he makes new ideas, and he ships product. So he doesn't have to bear any of the manufacturing responsibility, any of the capital costs. So none of these are the right way to do it. They're all options that people pursue for one reason or another. And then the last one is licensing. And some people think licensing is a bad name because, you know, I lose all the profit. Well, yeah. But if you listen to all the things I talked about, capital equipment or capital money for equipment, having somebody on staff who knows how to do manufacturing, quality certificate, having to deal with all that stuff, if you like to invent, sucks. So you want to go to licensing because then people just send you checks. And we were just in Idaho, we were talking with a company, and they had built this company, we'd done all the process, all the lean out, all the quality, and we started to talk to the owner. We said, what do you really want to do? And she said, I really just want to make stuff and invent it. I don't really want to run the manufacturing operations. And so it's a quality of life choice almost. So it's not a bad thing to think about. It's an option that you consider. So these are sort of the 4 different manufacturing strategies that you might entail. And so as you think about creating new products, you don't always have to make it in-house. In today's world, look for partners. They might have intellectual property, or they might have proprietary capability that you don't have that makes it really cheap for them to do something that you need. So think about that as you deploy out a new product or a whole strategy. So the last question, and I think somebody asked this in the first session about financing, and this comes from the study that Steve and his team did. Most companies, if you look at this graph, the bottom two rows, most companies in Montana do their financing through credit cards and other kinds of personal debt. They do not go to the bank that often, although most people that do go to the bank, this is probably established manufacturers with recognized cash flow, generally are able to get asset-based loans. So I think the question that Paige was talking about, how do you do banking without that, is perhaps a challenge when you're seeking to grow. Tom was fortunate because his local banker, and we do see this happening, where the local banker is the one that is willing to take the risk because they're not stuck with the formulas that, you know, a Bank of America requires you to follow. Not that that's a bad thing, but the local banker will take the chance to appreciate the quality of the company that you have and the risk that you're taking, and to modify that in terms of making a loan. But only 13% of the Montana companies actually do equity financing. Again, these are probably relatively well-established companies, so they're not always looking for that massive growth thing. So, you know, financing is an issue, but people are able to work with a lot of local elements to it. So the last thing I want to do, and I'm going to go over by 2 minutes, is show you a video, and this is Todd Daniels working with a company, and Todd was going to show it, but I convinced him not to. So he could have showed this, but I'm going to show it because he was nice enough to let me do that. But it's about a Montana company, and hopefully it's informative and inspirational to you, because this is who you are to us. Go ahead.
The Land Tamer is a commercial-grade amphibious vehicle that can pretty much go anywhere. We started a company in 1998. Now we're in business now, going on 13 years. Business is going well. We signed a licensing agreement with Lockheed Martin. No other vehicle has this much versatility. Most of the other vehicles are recreational type vehicles. Ours is tailored more towards the commercial customer. Over the 13 years of being in business, we now have vehicles in over 30 states and 5 foreign countries, and the company continues to grow. The idea really came from, hey, I can build something like that. I'm going to do this as a spare time, kind of a hobby, try to build up my own go anywhere kind of vehicle. I wanted one vehicle that could do it all. Go in water, land, snow. I had it all designed, it looked good on the computer, and I thought, wow, all I really need is about $850 to buy the parts. Well, lo and behold, within a week or so of that, I've got a check in the mail, a bonus check that I didn't know I was even getting. I thought, 850 bucks, that's almost exactly what I needed. I said, if that's not a sign from God, I don't know what is. It's something I have to do. I don't want to go through life wondering if this would have succeeded if I would just put the money and time into it. So I didn't know how to grow a company from this, from a little idea. I don't know if I could have done it without him. You need somebody to sort of guide you, and it's comforting to know you got somebody that can give you some advice.
And I first saw Pat with his vehicle at an outdoor sports show. So I talked to him about MMEC and what we did. A few months later, Pat called and said, why don't you come on by the next time you come through Townsend, and let's talk a little bit more about what MMEC can do to help me. Our center has had involvement and touches along the way for over the course of that whole 11 years. Do I work for the MEP system? Do I work for the state of Montana? Who do I work for? And really, when it comes down to it, I work for Pat Miller when he wants me to work for him.
And that's what they do, is help you figure it out. And I was very thankful for that service that they provided at that time, and still today.
We've done a lot of different things, and when I say we, it's truly been a center effort. And I'd say that every one of our field engineers has been on site wherever PFM has been to help lend some expertise to the process. Pat's really good at asking for help when he needs it and taking that information and using it.
He's probably been the most important support person that I've known. You need somebody you know is always going to be there, that you can call up and give you some advice or help you out. And that's one of the things I like about Todd.
MMEC and Todd Daniels have had a really big impact on PFM manufacturing, specifically because they bring in outside experience that small business such as ourselves don't have access to. When you bring in a person like Todd Daniels, he can explain it to you in layman's terms. He can provide training resources that are available regionally within a couple hours drive.
It is a great opportunity for me, Todd Daniels, to learn and grow. But I also love to be a part of a company and to be able to help them be successful. I know that they're going to take it, they're going to learn, and they're going to say thank you, and I'm going to apply them and move on. And those type of companies like PFM are the ones I think are more successful. Instead of saying, you know, oh, come in and solve our problem, it's help me solve the problem. You're part of our team. I'm going to use you the best of my ability, and then I'm going to apply it and move on. Everything they do is innovative. Their product is innovative, their processes approach when they're managing production, the way they're approaching their whole business model is innovative. So it's always changing, it's always adapting, it's always growing. So to me, that's what innovation is. It's a collection of all of those things.
I didn't know everything when I started this business. I learned it as I went. It's kind of like wanting to climb that mountain out here. It's across the lake and up there. I don't know how I'm going to get every step of the way, but you know that's where you want to go. So each and every day you walk around whatever obstacle it is that you have to get there so that someday you can be at the top of that mountain. It feels very good to be able to build something made in America and survive and make a living here. When you make something here and you ship it overseas, that's all new money coming into our country. That's what we want.
We know that it's important that we got to keep that manufacturing going so that we can have all these other supporting jobs.
There's a lot of people that want to see Montana be a real player in the manufacturing, not only from a governmental aspect, but from a local community aspect. Manufacturing is important for the U.S., that's a no-brainer. We have to get back to our roots, what made the country great, and that is manufacturing, that's innovation.
Thank you, Tab. I appreciate the address and the information and the resources that are out there for folks who know how tough it is to make it go. It's kind of lonely out there, so it's good to have folks that can support you. I also want to thank the presenters from earlier today, Tom Spica and Paige Darden and James Stevens and Ashley Moran and Bill Nicholson and Todd Daniels and Carrie Hester and Rhonda Cogill. Thank you guys very, very much for your input on the two panels. Oh gosh, you're right, I am sorry. Minor technicality, the most important guy speaking today, and we got to fire some questions at him. No free lunch around here. But I do want to thank those previous presenters. With that, questions for Tab. Wow. There we go, in the back row, front row. Go ahead, Tom.
Hey, look at that. Tab, what is going to be the biggest obstacle for us to overcome nationally to be able to once again become the manufacturing powerhouse that we once was? How are we going to get from where we are to where we really need to be? And what role will government play, and what role will the manufacturing industry play?
So I implement policy, so I can give you some observations that I have. We're actually going through a strategic planning study, if you will, and one of the issues that I think I hear again and again from the field, and Tom, you spoke of it, and I think almost every one of the speakers spoke of it, is workforce. When manufacturing starts to come back, one of the biggest challenges is finding qualified workforce. For some of the reasons that you kind of mentioned, manufacturing is not always viewed as a place for people to go. There's a initiative, and I don't know if you do it here, called Manufacturing Day, that we try and promote yearly, where we try and take all sorts of people through manufacturing plants to give them a sense of how high-tech it is, how clean it is, how rewarding it is as a career. I think that's one issue. The other, and I heard little pieces of it, the other is what I would call the loss of a manufacturing ecosystem. So the way we talk about that today technically is, you know, how does a company who wants to create a new product, and somebody asked this question earlier today, how do you find a supplier? How do you find raw materials? How do you find somebody who can do X, Y, and Z if you don't want to do it yourself? There's a book from a group at MIT, Manufacturing Something in America, I think it is, and it's a big study done by MIT. And they said that's one of the biggest challenges, is the loss of sort of the supply chain. A guy down the street or in the next town over who can do a prototype for you. That's not as strong as it used to be, and so I think we've got to figure out how to bring that back. You know, you asked a lot of questions, some of which are very complex, but those are sort of the two impressions I sort of think about these days, is the ecosystem and workforce supply.
Hi, my name is Andrew Pida, and my wife has been working on a product for about the last 3 years, and we're finally getting to the point where we're ready to go to market. She showed at the Consumer Electronics Show the last 2 years, got a lot of press internationally, was among best in show new products. And we're at the point now where she's a full-time working dermatologist. I own a small medical billing company here in town. We don't have the expertise, and we have not been able to successfully find marketing and sales people. The folks at the Commerce Department have been very helpful in helping us to get to the point where we're at. And so far, everything that we've done has been done in Montana for the most part. I mean, our tools, one tool, the first tool we had to have made in China just because that's the only place we could find that could do it. The second one we had made in Utah. We need modifications, and like, you know, we're just down here and it's hard to find tool makers that will take a tool and do modifications to it. You know, we had to do like all our own. I mean, like I said, we've done as much as we could. Right now, we're doing the packaging, getting ready to roll out right here in Helena, because this is where we live. It would be wonderful if there was some incubator for somebody like us that would provide the opportunity to sit down with us, and that could maybe either like, I know that Montana MSU has a great marketing entrepreneurial department, but if there was, you know, if they could like have that be like, have us be a project for senior or graduate students or something like that, that would be a wonderful thing. We're confident that we're going to get to where we need to go. It just would be a lot easier if we had somebody that could show us, you know, kind of take us by the hand and show us where we need to go. And I know that we have significant international market penetration ability with this product.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You know, I'm not the expert in the Montana resources, so in that sense, I don't have a good answer. But yeah, I think if there's, yeah, I think it sounded to me like there were a number of folks that might be interested in giving you some assistance. If you're in Helena, Todd, you know, my default is Todd talking to you, but it sounded like there were some resources there. So yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity, and congratulations for her being, or the product being recognized and stuff. That's great.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you, Tab. We certainly appreciate you coming to Helena and talking about how we can strengthen Montana's manufacturing center and create more jobs here in this state. Most of you know earlier this week the President submitted his budget proposal for the next fiscal year. In that proposal, the President called for 45 manufacturing innovation centers across this country. I'm going to get back to that in a second. But it is a clear sign that our manufacturing sector is on the rebound, and it's also a sign that it's in demand. In recent decades, we've seen too many manufacturing jobs being outsourced to other countries, manufacturing jobs that were the backbone of our economy. But now the international labor market is changing. It's shifting. And I believe there is an opportunity for many of those jobs to come back home, and Montana is a perfect place for those jobs to land. And why? It was talked about earlier today. We have a vibrant banking community in this state that supports small businesses. We have an incredible education schools of education, including trade schools, colleges, tribal colleges, to train tomorrow's workforce. And we have the outdoors to attract workers and entrepreneurs looking for a place to set up shop and enrich their quality of life. You know, earlier today we heard Dr. Evans talk about the millennials who want to find a place to live to give them a quality of life, and the jobs can come here. It's true in Montana, and we ought to use that, and we are using that, as a matter of fact, for business attraction and, in this case, manufacturing. And finally, we have the raw materials to make nearly any product imaginable in this state. And just an hour down the road on I-15, Butte Chief Executive Mac Vincent is working to land one of those manufacturing innovation centers here in Montana. Now, Butte Center would work with local manufacturers across the state, as well as businesses that extract natural resources, to create Montana-made products, while also ensuring that we extract those resources in a safe, responsible way. I've worked with Matt and the Butte Local Development Corporation to help get that center moving in the right direction once it gets authorized. But we have more work to do, because Montanans have shown for decades that we know how to handle our resources to create the products that Americans and folks around the world want and need. I will continue to push for policies to support our manufacturers, our manufacturing sector, and responsible use of our state's resources in our economy to create jobs. And I hope that the folks who came here today are able to leave with ideas that will help move your business forward and help it grow, and ultimately help create more jobs in this state. Let's continue to show that the world, that Montana is truly the last best place, not only to visit, but also to live, work, and raise a family. But today isn't quite over. I mentioned earlier the folks that have the booths over here and the tables to share information with you. They want to hear from you. I'm sure they already have heard from you, but if you have more questions, be sure and get over there. In particular, I want to highlight the representatives from the Small Business Administration. It really goes to the question that the gentleman in the back of the room had. We've got a lot of folks here: Small Business Administration, the Department of Agriculture, USDA Rural Development. If this workshop hasn't convinced you that you need to start, grow your business and get out there and get the capital that you need, there are folks from SBA and Department of Ag and Rural Development that are here that can not solve the problem in its entirety, but certainly help solve the problem. So if you haven't already, stick around, talk to some of these folks for a few minutes. I think it's good. And finally, I would just say thanks to Carroll College. They've been incredibly a pleasant host for us to be here. Thank you for the vendors for coming. Thank you to the City of Helena for helping us put this on. Thanks again for coming. There are basketball tournaments that you still can make this afternoon. So it's all planned out in good ways. But good luck, work hard, safe travels, stay in touch, and thank you for coming.